Hello. I uploaded a video a few days ago about the Percy Jackson show. I basically came to the conclusion that the show did not make any sense. So I'm making an update video today. Well, I got a lot of comments on the video, a lot of which I didn't think were fair. I mean, a lot of people were just telling me I should just read the book. It'll make sense if you read the book. I didn't really like those comments all that much. I think that was completely missing my point. It's like, why should I, like, if the show doesn't make sense on its own, why should I have to read the book to understand it? It was just not a good point, and I don't know why so many people went with that point, because, well, I'll get to it. There's a million better points you could have made than that. That's just a bad point. But I did get a lot of comments on that video that were actually, like, fair and reasonable, and people, you know, being constructive in their criticism. And I did realize that most people disagreed with me. It had more dislikes than likes, and so that makes me kind of, like, in my head, like, rethink, was I wrong? And, you know, a lot of what people were saying was just like, just basically like, you're an idiot if you can't follow this. This is like, it's the simplest thing ever. So, you know, I was like thinking in my mind, I'm like, am I being gaslit by so many people? Should I be steadfast in my beliefs? Because, like, I thought, like, sure, like, some of these things probably have explanations that I didn't miss, that I did miss, but, like, I had so many questions that I'm like, surely I'm not wrong about all of these things. And I want to clear up, just for the record, and I want to say, it's not that I wasn't able to follow the plot. I tried to make this clear, but I don't know if I did a good job of it. I could follow the plot, but in my mind, the world's rules weren't well explained, and blah, blah, blah. Like, that was more my focus, and I feel like it does make me look dumber if people are like, well, this is such a basic, obvious plot, but I feel like I want that on the record. And I realized that the only way that I could feel better about the video that I made and feel confident about the video that I made was just to, like, rewatch the show. Was just to rewatch the first 4 episodes. People were like, some people encouraged me to watch episodes 5 through 8 and do a second follow-up video, but I felt in my mind that wouldn't be a good idea if I was already, like, I don't understand the show. I already have this basis of, like, I don't get it. So if I, like, go into episodes 5 through 8, people are just gonna hate that again, because I'm just gonna keep not understanding it. You know what I mean? I didn't think it was a good idea to just, like, if I was gonna do that, I would have to just rewatch the show. And so I did. I sat down and I rewatched all 4 episodes in an afternoon, back to back. I wanted to pay close attention to it, not walk away or get distracted. And I realized that the video that I made was really bad. Like, really bad. I realized that so many things that I had talked about did have explanations. A lot of the things were just explained literally in the moment that, like, they were brought up. And I was just, like, felt like a complete idiot. So here I am, to, I guess, correct the record with this video. I'm not entirely sure what I intend, what my intent is with uploading this, except to just, like, maybe just redeem myself, I guess. I don't know, but I don't know if that's, like, fair, because I did just put out, like, a bad video in the first place, so it's like, I did do that. And me just being like, oh, actually, I was wrong, is not really, like, very impressive, you know? It's just not. So I'll just go over it, and I did take notes again to clarify everything. So from episode 1, literally the show starts off with the quote, once you know what you really are, they'll come for you. A lot of people said I just didn't understand this. I did vaguely understand it. I didn't, you know, I missed the line itself, but, like, I got the gist of the idea. What I thought in my head was that it wasn't, like, super clear, and that was because of a lot of things, a lot of sources of confusion. For example, the Mrs. Dodds thing, added to my confusion because why is she at the school? She seems to know about Percy in advance. For the record, I'm wrong about this, okay? I know why she's at the school now. I understand all of that, and it has nothing to do with Percy. So there were a lot of points of confusion as to, like, okay, at what point do the monsters, like, I guess my major issue with this was why doesn't the mom just tell him from the beginning? Why does she hold this information back? And the way this is worded is like, okay, if she does tell him, like, it's very clear this is why she doesn't tell him. Because if she does, then he'll know what he is. So that kind of, like, answers that question. And we'll just, we'll move on. So the scene where he pushes Nancy in the fountain, this was a point of confusion for me. It looks like he's, like, force pushing her or whatever. There was at least one comment I read that was basically like, oh, they didn't do this scene very well. Like, it's not supposed to look like he's intentionally meaning to push her. And I'm not sure, but I think it's not like a forced push, but rather that the fountain is, like, pulling her back, as happens with, like, the toilet scene in the second episode, and the fourth episode with the hand coming out of the water. It's like Poseidon doing that, I guess. This is probably one of the few things that's still kind of unclear to me. I know we're kind of starting off with stuff of me being like, well, I actually still don't understand, but most everything else is explained. That I'm not quite sure what the intent was. So the whole thing about Mrs. Dodds is this. It's wild, okay? But I understand it now, okay? So in the beginning scene when they're in the museum, Nancy does acknowledge Mrs. Dodds. So we already know that, like, she does exist at that point, at least. But once Percy stabs her with the sword and she dies, she, like, disappears. And then everybody forgets her. There is some weirdness about this. But the idea of it, and Grover kind of explains this somewhat later, when they're in the cabin, he talks about the mist. The mist is this thing, this mythical veil that hides the mythical world from humans, and it kind of disguises them, and it is also the reason why all of the humans would forget Mrs. Dodd's existence after she dies. But she did initially appear as a human. Everybody believed she was a teacher because she did exist. She just ceased existing once she was stabbed. I don't know if it's fair of me to say that I don't think that was conveyed super well. It's really only, like, if you notice at the museum and you notice that Nancy does acknowledge Mrs. Dodd's existence, and then after she's dead, everyone's like, wait, who's Mrs. Dodds? Like, you piece those two things together, and then also Grover mentions her quite a few times after. I don't know. This was in a comment. Somebody did explain to me that that's exactly what happens, is she ceases existence. So it's hard for me, again, to approach this from a fresh mind, I guess, a fresh perspective, because there's a lot of things that were explained to me that I do now know, and now that I know that, and I'm looking at the scene with the context, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. It does make sense with the necessary context. But without it, I don't know. I initially didn't understand this at all. So maybe that's on me. It's unclear. I have no idea. But I do still believe that the show kind of wants you to believe that he didn't intend to push her, even though it very clearly looks like he gets up, he stands up, he does a pushing motion like a foot away from her. It looks like he meant to push her, else why would you do that? And if he does it with magic, it's still intent. I don't know, but they want you to think that he didn't mean to do it. I don't know. It's still a little bit weirdly conveyed. But another thing I did notice when I watched this was, I did originally in the initial video, I said, well, it's weird that he gets kicked out of school for that. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. But when I was watching this, I realized that I think he's at, like, a private academy, like a really prestigious academy, which is not flat out stated really in the show, as far as I can tell. They never really say, oh, this is a really highbrow school, prestigious school, but it's called, like, Yancey Academy, and, like, it looks like they've got looks like it must be a really nice school. And I'm thinking, okay, if it's like a private academy, like, sure, they would have less tolerance for that sort of thing. So I actually do understand why he might get kicked out for that, even though at a normal public school, I feel like pushing a kid in a fountain isn't something that you're going to get knocked out of school for. I do want to kind of go back a little bit because I want to talk about, like, Grover, as he talks about in the cabin. Grover basically lies to get Percy kicked out of school at this moment because he thinks if Percy is at school all day, he won't be able to protect him. So he seems to know that the monsters are coming at this point and that Percy is in danger, and that's why he gets... I don't think I even brought anything about that up in my original video, but that's why he gets Percy kicked out of school. And also, another question I had was, why didn't they see Mrs. Dodds coming, which is kind of a little bit confusing because there's a lot of mentions that they did know about her in the past, but Grover does mention that she was kind of hidden by the veil at the point in which she attacked Percy, which normally shouldn't happen. Grover is supposed to be, as a satyr, he's supposed to be able to see through, or sorry, not the veil, the mist, better than anybody else. So it was weird that he couldn't see through it at that point. But it seems like from what they're saying that they were aware of Mrs. Dodds being a Fury before this happens. They were aware of her. And I'll say that because one of the lines in the cabin is the mom says, "What did she do?" at one point, and Percy's like, you knew about Mrs. Dodds? Like, the mom knew about Mrs. Dodds being a Fury? Specifically, she kind of implies this. Another question I had was how the mom knows so much, but I think really, like, there was communication going on between Grover and the mother, because it seems like the information that they have is information that they share, and they do seem to have, like, a parlay. When they meet at the cabin, they're familiar with each other, so it does seem like they were communicating probably in the background, which makes sense. She's his mother. He's his protector or whatever. So it would make sense that they would, they have shared interest in protecting Percy. So they would share information. One thing I do want to point out is that, and we get to this later in the second episode, it's revealed that the teacher in the wheelchair is actually one of the, I don't know if he's like the camp counselor. I don't know his exact position, but he's one of the two guys. He's Chiron. He's the centaur guy at the camp, which is interesting to note for a couple reasons. One is he doesn't see, like, he's one of the guys that, like, acknowledges after Mrs. Dodds dies. He's like, who are you talking? Who's Mrs. Dodds? And I feel like that's weird for him to do because him being one of the mythological people, he should remember her. So I think he's like lying on purpose in this scene, but it does kind of give mixed conveyance there of, like, I don't know, like, it's confusing. Does he not remember her? Does he remember her? Why would he not remember her? It's just kind of confusing when you have that be one of the characters that's like, but Mrs. Dodds, who is that? I feel like you should have made somebody else do that because it's confusing when he does it. But he does come to Percy and talk to Percy on the bench later on, and I think he acknowledges that he knew more than he was letting on, that he kind of does believe what Percy's saying. So it stands to reason that he was probably just lying, that he does remember her. I don't know why he would lie, I guess, in the moment, just to keep up appearances. But another thing that I wrote down is that humans can't cross the barrier. It's not something I ever really brought up at any point, but I don't think I caught that specific point from Grover. He mentions that humans can't cross the barrier. That's important information. I'm sure will be relevant later at some point. But I don't think I questioned the fact, like, why doesn't the mom just go into the camp with them? I maybe could have. That maybe could have been one of the dumb points that I brought up in the original video. I didn't. But I maybe could have brought that up. And so if I had, the explanation is that humans can't cross the barrier. And then I think the last thing that's kind of important from this episode is that the sword that Percy has is actually the pen that's given to him from Chiron. I do think Now, some people might point out that this is like obvious. I do think it's very kind of easy to miss, at least in the first episode, because like he just hands him the pen in the museum, and then I don't feel like it's conveyed well when he stabs the Fury because she's like on top of him, and the sword just comes out and stabs her. I don't think it's conveyed well that that was the pen in that moment, but it is more obvious later when he goes and he's fighting the Minotaur and he pulls out the pen, and then the pen turns into the sword very clearly. Again, this is definitely a scene that if you like blinked or you weren't like looking at the screen during this point, you could easily miss that as well. But I feel like it's also conveyed more in episode 2, especially when he has a conversation with Chiron. He's talking to Chiron, and he's like, "Hey, I lost your pen sword," and he's like, "Oh, just check your pockets," and then his pen sword is there. Which also conveys the point that Chiron is, in fact, the wheelchair teacher. It confirms that in case you weren't quite sure if that were the case. It is, because he's the one that gives him the pen. So the only, like, big overall note that I wrote down for episode 1 is that this is, I do feel like the explanations are there, but a lot of it does kind of feel very blink and you'll miss it, or just, like, step away for a second and you miss, like, critical pieces of information, which is, I believe, what happened to me. You know, I believe I just wasn't sitting in front of the screen like 100% of the time, and that's why I was like missing these lines that were explaining all of these things that I'm like, why is this show explaining this stuff? It's just you have to you have to have your eyes basically glued to the screen. You have to listen intently to every conversation. I was saying they weren't explaining enough. They explain everything in detail. Like, there's so much that they explain. So the last two things I want to clear up are, was the barrier well conveyed? Because originally when I made the first video, I stupidly assumed that when they go to the camp, they're like entering another world like Narnia. I brought this up in the comments to try to clarify where I was coming from with a lot of my questions. Do I think it's conveyed really well? Well, I think if you listen to Grover's conversation, he like does explain it. They point out to the hill. They're like, "Hey, just over that hill is where the camp is." And he's like, he mentions the protective barrier over the camp, very clearly saying that like it just physically exists. It's not like another world or anything. And they don't, for some reason, I like remember them going through a portal, but it doesn't happen. It's not what happens. He basically defeats the Minotaur, and then he collapses, and he wakes up surrounded by the other camp members. And then in the next episode, he wakes up in the infirmary. So it's not really shown him going through anything or even crossing the barrier, really. It's just like he defeats the Minotaur, he wakes up in the infirmary. So is the conveyance great? I don't know. I mean, it's flat out told to you, but it's really easy to just miss stuff like that. I don't know. I think it's really easy to miss stuff like that when it's just like a one-off line that's like, "Oh, it's just over the hill." I guess, I mean, they're driving there the whole time. That's their destination, is to drive to get to camp. So I'm gonna say that I know it's fine. The conveyance is fine. I think I'm just an idiot for assuming that. And the mom hiding thing's still valid. I kind of already covered this. Like, she specifically has to hide the fact that he's a demigod for obvious reasons. But the other thing is to hide the fact that Poseidon is the father after he already knows. In the show, obviously she could have told him that. It's kind of nitpicky for me to bring it up. Like, she could have thrown that information out, but clearly there's Grover shows up and he's like, "There's no time for you to explain anything else," and so they have to just leave, and so she just doesn't get a chance to say it, which is fine. And if I bring up the fact that she doesn't, it's a really nitpicky and kind of lame of me to go hard on that point, so I'm not going to. And it doesn't really ultimately matter because he finds out in the next episode. Episode 2, Dionysus. Again, in the video, I mentioned Dionysus was a mythological hero. Dionysus is not a mythological hero. He's a god. That was one of the things I felt really dumb about, because I was so sure in my head. I'm like, that's one of those Greek heroes. Clearly, I was wrong. Clearly, that's kind of embarrassing when you're so confident that that's the case, and I'm like, oh shoot, I was wrong about that. No, he's a god, which makes so much more sense. The camp leader is a god, and it's so obvious because they even say it in the show. They talk about like a Dionysus the god. It's literally the line after they mention him, and then they talk about how Zeus basically forbid him from like drinking wine. He's a god. They make a joke about how he might be Percy's father. I'm like, gosh, I just forgot about all of that. He was like, Dad? Son? I think a part of the problem for me was definitely that, like, I watched these as they were coming out, and there's, like, a week break in between, you know? And, like, if I didn't write something down specifically in my notes, there's a good chance I just forgot about it, you know? And if I wasn't paying quite enough attention, really, what it comes down to is I shouldn't have made a video about something I clearly wasn't, like, paying as much attention to or invested in. I don't know. It just seemed like I was clearly not... I didn't have the information I needed to make this video. Grover goes, he talks to the satyr, or not the satyrs, the woods people, and finds out that Hades has the power to steal people from their moment of death, which is what he assumes happened to Percy's mother, because she doesn't, like, get squished. She evaporates into dust or whatever. He's like, that's like what Hades would do if he stole somebody from their moment of death. And he tells this to Dionysus and Chiron, and they're like, yeah, we know, but, like, don't tell Percy. And the explanation given is that, like, there's forces at work that are unpredictable, and so it would be a bad idea to just give this information to Percy, because we don't know what would happen. Now, this explanation's not great in the moment, but they do go on to explain the whole situation that's going on with the gods a bit later. And at that point, it does start to... That does make sense. So I'll get to that when I get to that. Quick aside to clarify something here. For some reason, I called Luke Adam several times. I don't know why. But for some reason, when I say Adam, just understand that I'm talking about Luke, okay? Thank you. Adam has a line in this episode where he basically tells Percy not to try to understand why the gods do what they do. And I partially feel like it's also towards the audience to, like, oh, don't try to understand that. That's, you know, they may do stuff that's unpredictable. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that's the case, because they do kind of explain what the gods are doing, why they're doing what they're doing. But I think maybe it's like, oh, just don't think about it too hard. Don't try to think about, like, the specifics of, like, how they're treating the children specifically, why they don't pay attention to them. There's little things like that maybe you don't understand, maybe seems bad. And just, like, don't think about that for now. Maybe, you know, it's not worth thinking about. Oh, one of the scenes I did mention in the original video, again, this is another thing I mentioned, was why is Percy just randomly, like, a good fighter? Now, I believe this is explained in episode 2, when they go through this whole thing of, like, trying to get Percy to do a bunch of stuff. He tries, like, archery, and he's bad at archery. He tries blacksmithing, and he's bad at blacksmithing. So it turns out that every demigod has, like, a thing that they're good at, a job. And they're trying to figure out what Percy's thing is. Percy ends up just knowing how to fight really well. That ends up being his thing. I don't believe this is super well conveyed, because you can piece it together if you're like me rewatching this. I pieced that together and I was like, oh, that's probably what that is. Like, when he fights really well, that's probably, like, his thing, right? It makes sense to me in the rewatch, but in the moment, I don't know if that's obvious. So they do explain the whole forbidden children thing. Apparently Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, they made a pact. I believe Adam explains this. He says that Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, they made a pact not to father children. Specifically because their children, I believe they're too powerful. It's, like, not fair or something. I don't know exactly what that means or why that's a bad thing. They're like, their children are more powerful than other children and more better and cooler. And so they're like, well, that's not fair, so let's not have children. We'll make a pact. We're not going to have any children. But, and This I actually like, because there is this, like, kind of string thread of lore that precedes the show that you can kind of piece together from characters explaining this whole thing. Apparently, Zeus broke that original rule, that original pact. He was the first one to break the pact, and he had a kid. And this kid was named Tali. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we learn about her later, but Zeus breaks it first. And this is important. This is important lore. So this is what I'm saying. There's like, you know, you do have to really pay attention to this show, because if you miss like stuff like this goes to explaining why Zeus acts the way he does later. Is like this specific piece of information is important. And it's also a thread that kind of gets brought up later when we talk more about Tali. I think it's Tali or Talia. I don't know. It's one or the other. So the whole thing with Annabeth here, I was questioning her motives and how she seemed to know what she knew. It turns out in this that the reason she knows about forbidden children and she's like interested in Percy is because she knew Tali. And Tali was another forbidden child. She was the first forbidden child and the last one that's ever popped up. They were friends. Annabeth recognizes in Percy that he might also be a forbidden child, especially when she sees in the bathroom the hand come out of the toilet or whatever and like attack the bullies. She's like, yes, you're probably like a son of Poseidon. She like puts it together. She's smart. She puts that together. And she recognizes that Percy being a forbidden child is good because it means that she can kind of use him to bolster herself, her own position. She talks about how she can like use him to like win capture the flag, which is like a whole... It's an act of glory if they win capture the flag. But furthermore, what she really wants is she wants to be on a hero's quest. And she believes that through Percy and through a friendship or an association with Percy that she'll be more likely to be put on a quest, on a hero's quest, and that he can help her with that. I don't think it's necessarily like super clear why I think she just a big thread of her character throughout this is her just love and trust in Athena. And you know, we learn more about that later, that she kind of has this blind trust in Athena, more so that because like her parents didn't like care for her. I want to, you know, the point where like I have to completely dismiss my first video just because like all of that stuff, I did talk about some of this stuff, but I talked about it completely wrong. And it's explained that like her, well, I'll get to it. We'll get to it later. That's Annabeth's motivation. She basically, I think, is just kind of caught up on Athena. She thinks she's this entity of justice and virtue. And so she wants to impress her. She wants to be acknowledged by her. She definitely does actually love and appreciate Athena, despite not having ever actually met her so far. Or I don't actually know if she's been acknowledged by Athena, like she's been claimed. I think... Like, that is another thing I'm maybe unclear on, is, like, obviously not every kid is in the same, I want to say the same camp as Percy, but that's bad wording. Not every kid is in the same situation as Percy, where, like, they're being chased, you know, they don't have time for the parent to, like, disclose the information of who the god was. But I assume a lot of the parents do know which god it was that is the other parent. So a lot of these kids would still have that information going into camp, right? And they don't need to be claimed in order to be like, oh, that's who my parent is, right? They would just know that. So I don't think in the show it's super clear whether she's been claimed by Athena or she just knows that Athena is the other parent. I'm not sure how to like really know if you can tell if a kid has been claimed by Athena or by anybody. I'm not even really sure if she shows up in the house with the other kids in the Hermes house. Which also, like, Adam does call her his sister, despite the fact that he's a son of Hermes and she's a daughter of Athena. I don't actually know what he means by that, because I realized, like, he does say that they like oh, I'm on her side because she's my sister, but they're actually not related in any way. So I'm not sure what he means exactly. I don't think that's super clear. Like he's just her friend. They're just good friends. But I don't know why he calls her his sister. Again, it might be something that I missed. Well, like, Annabeth goes into her backstory and explains, like, oh, I was, like... She also does... They do explain the whole childbirth thing with the female gods, with Athena. And I get so mad at myself, like, watching this. I'm like, God, they explained even that. They even explained that, and I missed it. Basically, Athena, like... Annabeth comes into existence from a thought in Athena's brain, and then she basically gives that as a gift to, let me see, hold on, I worded this exactly, a partner she feels connected to. So she basically, like, gives the child as, like, a gift to, I suppose she could give it to either a man or a woman, I suppose, not assume, but that's how it works for Athena. And this is actually a big part of Annabeth's backstory, because since she was given as a gift, the father initially loved her. This is explained in episode 4, by the way. So we're jumping ahead a bit. The father initially loves her, and then the stepmom comes into the equation, and then they have kids together, and then suddenly she feels ignored, neglected. She doesn't feel like they care about her or that she's special anymore. In fact, the stepmom seems to really hate her specifically. So she runs away from home. And this is why she's so attached to Athena, because she sees that humans are, like, flawed, and the gods literally present her as a gift. Like, a gift from God is what she's supposed to be, and they just don't appreciate her. But she thinks in her brain, she's like, well, Athena, the gods, they still will see me that way. They're not going to change their mind about what I am. I just might have to, give offerings and stuff every now and again. But they'll see me as I am, as special. They won't ignore me. So that's Annabeth's backstory and why she's so attached to Athena, which makes perfect sense. Okay? I understand all this now. So then we get the explanation from, I believe, the camp counselors from Chiron and Dionysus explain the whole situation and the quest and everything at the end of episode 2. So apparently Zeus seems to think that Percy stole his bolt of lightning. So it is revealed that the bolt of lightning is what was stolen. Zeus thinks Percy stole it, and the reason he thinks that is because Zeus initially broke that pact that they weren't going to have kids, and so he thinks that Poseidon is, like, getting back at him by also breaking the pact and having a kid, and that this kid is trying to get retribution against Zeus for breaking the pact in the first place, and so he must have been the one to steal the bolt. Okay? I actually really like this. So, not every god agrees, a lot of them don't, but he basically is like, alright, here's the ultimatum. Basically, by the summer solstice, you have this quest, I'm giving it to Percy. Percy, if you recover my bolts by the summer solstice, you won't cause this great war between the gods, okay? And everything will be cool and everything will be chill and we'll just all move on and forget about it, okay? So that's why Percy gets the quest, and that's also why the gods, specifically Zeus, might try to stop him on this quest, is because Zeus doesn't believe him. Zeus wants him, Zeus is like, you're the kid that stole the bolt. I'm gonna kill you if you give me the chance. And it's also just because he's a forbidden child. He broke the pact. Poseidon broke the pact. This kid shouldn't exist. And it's also maybe a bit, he's a bit jealous that Percy is allowed to walk free when his child was turned into a tree, which we haven't gotten to. But his child was turned into a tree. And so maybe there's a bit of jealousy there. But I love all this, and I wish I had paid attention to it. Because this is really cool. When I get this information, I'm like, oh, I can push that forward, and then I get new information, and I can connect all these puzzle pieces. I really regret not paying attention. So the assumption is that Hades probably has the bolt. I'm trying to remember if there's an exact reason. They kind of just say, like, Hades, we think Hades has it. Like, we're pretty sure, like, Poseidon doesn't have it. Zeus is just crazy with his bitterness. But we're pretty sure that if anybody has it, it's probably Hades. Part of the suspicion is that the camp people do actually know in advance that they seem to just know that. They seem to just have that information. I don't know how much further you can question it. But, like, when Grover comes to them and says, hey, I think Hades stole Percy's mom, they're like, oh, yeah, we know that. So it's like they already kind of suspect that Hades did this, and that's probably kind of confirming their suspicions that, like, Hades also took Percy's mom. It's like Hades is also probably bitter, maybe because his two brothers broke the pact and he didn't break the pact. You know, he's just mad at them and he's punishing both of them. You know, pitting them against each other. That makes sense. You know, we can think about that. We can come to a conclusion. Although that's an assumption, it's suspicion that Hades has it. It's not a confirmation that Hades definitely has it. So the confirmation then comes in episode 3 when they have Percy go talk to the Oracle. And the Oracle basically confirms, she says specifically to go west. So this is a direction, this is a heading. She says go west, which basically confirms to Chiron and Dionysus that, hey, Hades must have this. If they're telling us to go west, like, the entrance to the underworld is in LA. It's in Los Angeles. So west, Los Angeles, that makes sense. It adds up. It clicks. So that's how they get there. That's how they get that information. That's how they understand that information. And so they send Percy to go to Los Angeles. I did initially question why he decides to choose Grover. If Grover was, obviously a friend of his, I'm like, wouldn't you just pick two people who weren't your friends if you know a friend is going to betray you? But they do explain this. They do have reasoning behind this. He chooses Annabeth specifically, and he doesn't, like, say this until later, until, like, this is episode 3, but until the end of episode 3, he explains to Annabeth, like, I chose you because I didn't think we could ever be friends. Okay, so that's why he chooses Annabeth. And then the other one he chooses is Grover. The reason he chooses Grover is actually very sweet. It's because he trusts Grover so much that he knows that Grover would never betray him. He's like, you'll never betray me, so I know that it can't be you. Which I actually kind of accept that explanation. I kind of accept that. I think that's very cute and sweet. Grover starts telling the story about Tali while they're walking out in the field. That Tali was, like, a friend of both Luke and Annabeth. And he tells this story about them. When they were in school, they were being chased by two Furies. Okay, they say this. And Grover basically confirms that one of them was Mrs. Dodds, because Percy asks, like, oh, Mrs. Dodds? And he's like, yep. And then another teacher that was, like, another teacher was also a Fury. So they were being chased by two. And Tali basically turns around and she's, like, gonna fight the Furies. And then Zeus decides, in order to save her, he turns her into a tree. And so she basically gives her life to, like, save them. And it's also, it's revealed Annabeth had a lot of respect for Tali. Apparently, really liked her. We don't know much about, like, Luke and his relationship with Tali. But it's also, Grover also kind of mentions that, like, the satyr in this story, her protector, her satyr, told her not to do this. And she didn't listen. And he makes a big point of that. It's revealed later that I believe the satyr... It's a little confusing. It's maybe not a little confusing, but the satyr in this story was actually all of it. Like, he was actually the protector of Annabeth, Luke, and I think Tali. So he is definitely that satyr in this story. So he was, like, a protector of all three of them, which is a little odd, that this is the only satyr we've seen other than the one that's, like, turned to stone in Medusa's basement. But why he's been like literally everyone's protector. He's a little too tied in there. And also, I guess, just how involved he is in this camp, seemingly. He goes to the wood people. He's able to communicate directly to the camp leaders. Just a little odd. I don't know where the other satyrs are. I'm not sure. That's something that's been... It hasn't been explained. I mean, it has, kind of, but... They talk a little bit about the satyrs a little later, but... Why there's only one in this moment, and he seems to have been assigned to everybody, I'm not entirely sure. Now he gets to be so heavily involved, but I don't think it so much matters. I think we'll find out later. I definitely think it's one of those where it's like, we can push that aside and be like, oh, it'll probably be explained later. We don't have to, like, dwell on everything. They do talk about why... this was something that didn't make sense to me, because they have this line about, like, why does... like, the reason they don't take a plane is because... like, the gods will attack them in the sky, right? Like, Zeus will send a lightning bolt and destroy the plane. And so they imply that the gods are more the threat than the monsters, which didn't really make sense to me, because I'm like, why can't Zeus also attack a bus? Like, if he wanted to do that? And the reason is actually given here, and I do think there was a comment, definitely on the original video, that was, like, pointed this out specifically, is that the wording that they say the sky is Zeus's domain, which specifically, like, clears all of that up. It's like, if you go into the sky, that's his domain. If you're on the ground, you're not in his domain. And Zeus is the main guy that's probably going to try to kill them over anybody else. So, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. I don't have any questions about that. There is another line here that I didn't even write for the first episode. But I believe Grover mentions, like, we're on episode 3, by the way. I don't know if I ever, like, pointed that out. What a monster senses depends on the monster, which I think is a good line to, like, add to the world building there, because they do talk about how they're trying to, like, mask their scent by sitting in the back of the bus near the bathroom. But Grover says in this moment, he's like, well, that'll work for some monsters, but it depends on the monster. Some monsters will be able to see right through that. And I thought that was great, because it does go to explain how the Fury that gets on the bus is able to find them. Annabeth has a short conversation with the Fury that's on the bus. This Fury is confirmed to actually be the same Fury that was chasing Annabeth and Tali and Luke in that original story that Grover tells, alongside Mrs. Dodds. She's confirmed in this moment to be that same Fury. She's one of the two. Mrs. Dodds is the other one. So they already know each other, and she talks about Talia, you know, and she also confirms in this moment that she's basically confirms that she was sent by Hades. She's one of the Furies that Hades sent. And she also confirms that she is not there to kill Percy, but instead to take him to Hades, which I think is an interesting point, that Hades doesn't actually want to kill Percy necessarily, and I think it's because he wants to bargain with Percy. We can kind of anticipate that if Hades saved his mom in the moment of her death, he's got the mom, he can manipulate Percy and say, hey, I want this war to happen. He can do all sorts of things. So he wants to talk to Percy, which I think is clever. I think is smart. I think it's very smart of Hades. I think we're going to find out that Hades is actually this master manipulator. He's really thought this whole thing ahead. So I'm actually very excited to meet Hades. There is a moment in this where a Fury flies in through the window of the back of the bus while the other Fury is, like, going, you know, walking forward as everybody's trying to get out, being pushed back by everybody. Another Fury flies in through the window. I'm like, I don't know if I missed this or I completely forgot about this, but she's, like, instantly killed by Annabeth with, like, a knife. So, I'm like, that's kind of, like, out of nowhere, that just the third Fury just shows up out of nowhere and instantly gets killed. It's like, that's kind of funny. As far as I know, you know, I hate to say I'm like, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm, like, an expert on Greek mythology, obviously, you know, I wouldn't say that. But, you know, there's some things I do know. I do believe there's only 3 Furies. So, two of them are dead, and this is the only one that's left, is the one that's on bus. I forget what they call her. They call her Eloki or something like that. That's probably not it, but it starts with an E. She has a specific name, and she's like the last Fury that's like following them as they go into Medusa's Garden Gnome Emporium, Miss M's Garden Gnome Emporium. We get the backstory of Medusa. Again, another thing I just completely, like, my eyes glossed over when this happened originally, so I have it now. Medusa, weirdly, is very tied in with both parents of Annabeth and Percy, because Medusa was loved by Poseidon. Poseidon, like, fell in love with her or whatever, and she loved Poseidon, and Athena got mad about it, and she punished Medusa, which Medusa thought, that's really unfair. Like, why didn't you punish him? Why are you punishing me? Like, I'm your... Like, Medusa is, I believe, a daughter of Athena. So, like, she loves Athena, she worships Athena, Athena is her girl, and Athena punishes her instead of Poseidon for, like, which she views as unfair. She says, you know, she's supposed to be this virtuous source of, like, justice and, you know, I don't know, beauty, love, and she betrayed me. That was not justice. That was not fair. She punished me unfairly. That's why Medusa hates her. Annabeth's whole thing in this moment is not basically being mad about her shitting on the gods and saying the gods are unfair. It's her specifically shitting on Athena, which makes sense. Annabeth doesn't... I don't feel like Annabeth is, like, really, like, oh, I love the gods as a whole, but she loves Athena. And so any hate spewed towards Athena, she doesn't accept. She doesn't accept as reality or truth, which is fair, which makes sense. Okay? Medusa basically offers to, like, get rid of the other two, which Percy obviously isn't going to agree to. There's some things I'm skipping over. Like, they do have a conversation in the woods. They talk about, like, giving up. At one point, they're like, oh, well, if we give up, they'll just send somebody else. And he's like, oh, I'm fine with that. And that's what Percy says. Percy's like, oh, I'm fine with that. And she's like, what are you afraid of? And then he gets called out. He's like, what do you mean? I'm just, this is all stupid. It turns out Percy obviously is thinking about the whole friend betraying him thing. And he also just doesn't have much love for the gods. This is all sort of cleared up by the fact that he is, you know, he obviously loves his mother, but he kind of doesn't love Poseidon all that much. He views Poseidon as, like, abandoning him. Poseidon to him is, like, nobody. He's just some guy that abandoned him. You know, the father he never had that just never cared about him. So he doesn't have any sort of allegiance towards the gods. He's kind of, you know, against them in a lot of ways. And so he doesn't understand everybody's, like, desire to impress them. He doesn't really care about all of that. So that's kind of his perspective. Just cover that. Oh, I talked about the flying shoes. I mentioned in the St. Louis Arch episode 4, that I'm like, oh, he could have been wearing those flying shoes. It turns out, upon rewatching episode 3, Grover's wearing the flying shoes, which did they ever show him, like, I don't think they ever show him giving the shoes to Grover or anything like that. But, like, he's clearly wearing them because he says the Maya word, which is what activates them, and he starts flying away. It's like, oh, Grover's wearing those shoes. And he's still wearing them in episode 4. As I watched episode 4, I'm like, he's still wearing those shoes. He's wearing those shoes. At what point did Grover get the flying shoes? I don't remember him being given the flying shoes, but, you know, that happened at some point. So, you know, maybe it's another thing I missed. I don't know, but I feel like I paid really close attention this time, so I don't think that was shown. All right, I feel confident about it. They talk about the hat. Annabeth obviously has this invisibility hat, and it's still a dumb scene. Okay, can I still talk about, like, how some of these scenes are really dumb? Okay, the first scene I want to talk about is his mom sitting in the rain listening to Olivia Rodrigo. That is a dumb scene. That is really dumb, okay? It's silly. I can make fun of it. I want to. I'm getting stupid. Okay? Second scene. Which one comes next? I'm trying to remember. No. Hold on. Oh, second scene. He does a floss dance. While he's waiting around during Capture the Flag, he does a floss dance. That's dumb. Okay, it's dumb to do floss dance. Stupid. Next scene is the scene in this episode where he closes his eyes, and then she puts the invisibility hat on Medusa, and then he can open his eyes, and she's still invisible. Both times he can't see her. It's still dumb. Still dumb. Okay, that scene's still dumb. But then they do discuss why Percy sends the head to the gods, and they actually kind of agree to do this together, which I did need to rewatch this because I was like confused later on. I'm like, why did he send that head to them? And there's two reasons. Because initially he suggests that they should leave the hat on Medusa's head and then bury her underground, bury the head underground so that nobody can find it and use it because it's too dangerous. But then Annabeth gets mad about that, and then Grover explains, hey, obviously she doesn't want to do this because the hat is the only gift she's ever been given by Athena, so obviously she wants to keep the hat. Like, that should be important to you. That should matter to you, that she wants to keep the hat. You're asking her to basically leave this hat. It's an unfair ask, which is good of Grover to point out. Grover also points out that, Percy's dealing with the fact that his mother might still be alive and that he's now going on a quest to maybe save her, maybe not. And it's just a really confusing situation for him, how he's going to have to make a big decision at the end of this, and he's maybe not going to know what to do in the end. So he's dealing with a lot. He's very confused. This is great stuff. This is us acknowledging our fears and our faults and what's going on in the characters' heads and getting to the bottom of it. And so far, that's 3 episodes, okay? I guess to wrap that up, they do send the head up to Olympus. They put it in a box. They all agree to do this, and they send it to Olympus. And they do show in this that basically Mount Olympus is at the top. It's a secret button in the Empire State Building to go to the 600th floor of the Empire State Building to get to Olympus. So that's how you get to Olympus. One thing that is maybe a little bit like, oh, you're not supposed to question this, is like they do put it in a box and they do have to like mail it specifically. So do they know that Olympus is at the 600? They must know that information, which I think it would be weird, for them to not know. But how did they ship? Like if it comes down to later they don't know where Olympus is and they have to be like, where's Olympus? Then I would question that, and I would say, hey, what about that box you shipped to Olympus? You must have known where it was. So I would hope that piece of information carries through. Episode 4. There's not as much to talk about with episode 4 because, like, a good amount of the lore dump comes from episodes 1 and 2, I would say. Episodes 3 kind of goes on to just explain, I don't know, maybe some more about the monsters and the danger, threat levels and everything. So episode 4, we get Annabeth's backstory, which I pretty much already went over. One thing I do question about this episode is that, and this is episode 4. Episode 4 is the train episode. Okay. So Jersey, so they're in, okay. So they start in New York, right? They start in New York City. And then they end up going to Jersey. And then they end up in a forest. Percy makes a comment. He's like, hey, it's weird that we found woods in Jersey, but here we are in the woods in Jersey. And then next episode, they are on a train. They defeat Medusa on that satyr path, and then they end up on a train. And then they talk about how it's a 3-day journey to get to LA by train. And although I don't feel like doing the math on all of that, it feels like it almost feels like there's a lot that should have happened in between there. I don't know. I guess I'm wrong, because they only end up by the end of this episode, they end up in Missouri. So they barely spend a day on the train. I don't even think they spend a whole day on the train. They only make it as far as Missouri. But it did start to feel like in this episode that they were just like suddenly booking it, across the country. I'm like, wow, they're getting there. They're getting there fast. I guess the train is what did it. What was starting to do it. So they initially take a bus and then they get kicked off the bus. Well, they initially take a taxi. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about everything they do, okay? They take a taxi. to New York City proper. Then they get on a bus, probably like a Greyhound. I guess it's like a Greyhound bus. And they're on this bus for a little bit until they get kicked. I don't even know if they start. Do they even start the bus? They don't even start the bus, do they? They're sitting on the bus waiting for the bus to start. So they never even make any progress on that bus, I don't think. Do they? No, they do. It was stopped. I think it was like a rest stop. So they were on the bus went somewhere, and then it stopped at a rest stop, and that's when they get attacked, I think. I don't remember. Something like that. I'm just trying to put together, like, how much progress we've made. So at that point, they go on down the Seder Trail, right? And then after that, they get on a train. So they had to take a bus, and then they had to take a Saturn path from wherever they stopped on the bus to get to the train. I don't know. I'd like to see if somebody could like map out this path. I wonder if that's like that makes sense. Like there's like somebody that could be like, oh, they clearly went this way. I want to see if somebody could do that. Because then can you take a train? Can you get to that train and then take that train from Jersey to LA? Can you do that? Because that's what they were implying they could do, even though they weren't able to do that because then they stop in Missouri. Okay. That's all. I just wanted to... St. Louis, specifically, they stopped. We do get some backstory about the satyrs. They talk about Pan, the god Pan, the god of nature. And Grover mentions how Pan... I think it was Grover that mentioned... It might have been Annabeth that mentioned it specifically. I don't remember. It's mostly Grover telling this story. But Pan disappears... this is when they're in, like, the cafeteria cart, like, eating lunch or eating breakfast or whatever. Pan disappeared, the god of nature. And then they talk about how, like, oh, the humans started, like, ruining the world because Pan's gone. It's because they saw a bunch of centaurs. And they're talking about, like, how nature's dying. They're like, oh, you don't see so many centaurs anymore. They're like the buffalo. They were almost hunted to extinction. I don't think they were hunted because they couldn't be hunted. But they were, like... They're just, like, dying out because they're, like, mythological creatures that depend on nature, I guess. And Pan's gone. And then this extra lore, they talk about the bravest satyrs volunteer to find Pan to become, I believe the word they use is searchers. It was kind of hard to like, hear exactly what word they were using. But I believe they say searchers. Every... satyr that's became a searcher has apparently disappeared inexplicably, except for the one satyr that we do know what happened to him, which was the satyr that was turned into stone by Medusa that Grover acknowledges in episode 3. At the end of episode 3, he's like, oh, this is my guy, I remember him, he was one of the searchers. So we know what happened to him. So the cabin, their cabin gets ransacked. Oh, it's interesting to note. I want to talk about this because I forgot to mention at the end of episode 3, they used the Medusa head to turn the last Fury to stone. And although I don't think they acknowledge it at any point that this is the last Fury, there's only 3 Furies and they've killed 3 Furies. This is at least, I mean, there's only one more episode after that, but this is the last time we see the Furies. So I do think that's clear cut, that the Furies are all gone now. No more Furies. We've killed them all. We've killed all 3. We've killed Medusa. So now we have a new villain, a new monster, and this new monster is Echidna, which they call the Queen of the Monsters, which I feel like is we're kind of, you know, the power levels are getting pretty high pretty quickly, and I think we're only in the first book, so I'm like kind of crazy. I guess they don't like fight Echidna, or they fight the Chimera technically. They don't even kill the Chimera. They actually get kind of beat up by the Chimera, to be honest. So they do have an explanation as to why the cabin was ransacked, and they seem to say that, like, the gods, and I didn't really like have like a specific question as to like why the cabin was ransacked, but they do say that, like, there's some god that's like looking for, clearly thinks we have the bolt and sent Echidna to like recover the bolt. That's why they were ransacked. They were clearly searching for that. We don't know who it was though, and I don't know if we can assume it was Zeus. He's the most likely to do something like that, but doesn't mean he's the one that did it. It could have been another god that sent Echidna. We don't really know. It could just be Echidna acting on it. Well, I don't think it's implied that it was Echidna acting on her own. It might have been stated that it was Hades that sent her. I don't remember. I don't think they say who sent her specifically. So the only thing we do know is that she shouldn't be allowed into the arch, into the monument. It's an Athena monument. It should protect them. But Athena allows Echidna in because they sent the head to Olympus. Specifically, obviously they mention that like, oh, well, she didn't send the monster, she just allowed the monster to come at them, which is pretty brutal. Pretty brutal thing to allow like the queen of the monsters to like kill, you know, one of your daughters if you actually like the daughter. But that's what she does. So we do know that that was taken as an insult. Actually, I should mention that it was basically directly an insult to Athena to send the head of Medusa. Like that would insult specifically Athena more than anybody else, I think, because it's like it was one of her daughters that she punished. It's like probably to her maybe a source of guilt. Probably specifically didn't like that, so that's I should mention that. I don't know how Poseidon really feels about that. He apparently was in love with Medusa at some point. He doesn't seem to care that much. In fact, he saves Percy at the end of this episode. They do talk about the St. Louis Arch, and you know, they do talk about how like it was actually built by a demigod as a monument to Athena, and they make comment like actually it's a monument to a lot of other things. Okay, so we're at the end of episode 4, and I feel like I've clarified every point that I make. I don't have any questions anymore. Like I feel like every single thing that I actually questioned did have an answer, and I feel really dumb about the original video that I made. So I want to say like I don't, you know, I feel like I'm just gonna leave this video as it is. I've already unlisted the other video, and I don't know how people will feel about that I've unlisted it. I'm not maybe going to delete it or private it, but I just feel like there's no point for it to exist. It just sucks. It's just a bad video where I just like got everything wrong, you know. It's just like dumb. So I don't see the point of leaving it up if it's just a piece of garbage that just doesn't deserve to be noticed by anybody. This video should be better, but maybe it's a little weird in lacking the context of the initial video. So I guess what I could do is leave the link to the unlisted video so that you can watch that terrible video, and then you'll have the context for this video if that's necessary. I don't know how much people care about that, but this video I hope is better. I do want to kind of like go on and you know, maybe defend myself as to why, as to what that original video was, what the deal with that was, because I feel like it's important to offer the context of what was going on in my head. First of all, I watched this show literally when it came out. I watched the first episode, and I don't think I paid that close attention to it. I really think I was just doing chores around the house. You know, Christmas was coming up, and I was just like casually had this on in the background. I really don't think I was paying attention to it at all. And I got to like the end of it, and I was like, oh, this is kind of stupid and silly. Like, maybe I'll make fun of it. You know? I was like, oh, maybe I'll take some notes. And I wrote some stuff down about the episode that I noticed. And then I did the same thing with the episode 2. And I don't think I paid that close attention to episode 2 either, really, because I clearly missed a lot there as well. Wrote some more notes. And then episodes 3 and 4, I think, you know, and you have to keep in mind that I'm going to forget stuff just because when there's a week in between, and I'm definitely doing stuff in between, you know, I'm going to forget stuff as well. So, you know, I feel like there were things I remembered, like, watching, and then it was like, oh, this piece of information in that moment, I'm like, oh, yeah! Like, well, I definitely didn't, you know, store that in my memory banks at all. I just kind of, like, moved past it and then never thought about it again. Yeah, and then I got through episode 4, and I felt pretty confident by episode 4 that this show was not good, that it didn't make any sense. Because I had like a million questions. I'm like, oh, none of this stuff's explained. It doesn't make any sense. I felt in episode 3, I'm like, well, I don't like the way these characters are talking to each other. I feel like they're accepting of things too quickly. And now I feel really dumb thinking that, because I don't think that anymore. It's hard for me to know if it's just like, oh, it now makes sense if you rewatch it, because I had a lot of extra context now when I was rewatching it. I had a lot of answers given to me from comments, so it's like I already have that information in my head. So I'm like, is it making more sense to me because I already kind of understand better now? Or is it making more sense to me because I was stupid and not paying attention the first time? I don't know. That's what's hard to come to grips with. But I also want to talk about the video making process. Nobody actually called me out on this, but it's like a really thrown together piece of crap video. Like, I didn't put effort into it, okay? It's not even really a video. It's like I took trailer footage, like 5 minutes of trailer footage, and like just cut it up into pieces and like rearranged it. And then the rest of the video, like an hour and 10 minutes, is just like a static background. And it's just me talking for like that entire time. And that's why I like basically was like, I don't know what to call this. I don't know. I literally just recorded it in like an afternoon. You know, I'm like, I'll call it like a podcast, I guess. But I didn't want to put any effort into like making it into like actually a video. Mostly just because I was kind of experimenting. I didn't really think people were going to watch it. And so many people watched it. And then I felt like garbage. I felt so bad. It actually kind of like messed with my psyche to when I was on YouTube, like watching stuff, just seeing those notifications keep popping up, and every new one is just like a comment just calling me stupid. It's just like, it gets to you, man. It gets to you. But I didn't expect it to really cause that reaction. So it's just not something I put a lot of effort into, and I want to make that clear. I don't know what I expect people to get out of this video. If I expect people to, be like, oh, maybe you're not so bad, maybe. No, cut that. Anyways, I guess that's it. I don't know if I'm gonna do episodes 5 through 8, because like if I continue with the original, like I can't continue with the original hypothesis, right? That like the show's bad and it doesn't make any sense, because I've disproved that. I don't believe that anymore. In fact, I even think I kind of like the show now. I think I actually like it. I think it's actually kind of up my alley, just because I do like complex lore and piecing things together, which would sound stupid to say if I had said that, at the end of my first video. I would have sounded like an idiot, like, oh, well, you ignored all of the lore, though, but... So, I don't know, I kind of like it. I don't know, but if I go with this direction, like, I can't just explain what's happening in the video. That's boring, so or explain what's happening in the series, I mean. 3 episodes, 5 through 8. I don't know if I'm going to do that. Because I've kind of started this as like a podcast series, I don't know how much interest there actually is in like people continuing to watch it, especially given that the first episode was really bad. Just a really bad video. I don't know how many people are actually going to, would have any interest in coming back because of that video. But like, if I continue it as a series, like, I feel like I can just do sort of a free form, like discuss certain topics, just kind of free form, and not like have it be focused on like a specific, like, oh, I'm reviewing this TV show this week, So I could talk about episodes 5 through 8 if I continue it in that regard, but maybe amongst other topics is what I'm trying to say. But I suppose we'll see when I ever actually decide to do that. I have 2 other series going on right now. I'm doing an Animal Crossing series where I'm trying to basically just complete as much of the game as possible within 1 year. No time travel, nothing like that. It's the first Animal Crossing. I've been doing that series for a very long time, and I think I've got like 4 or 5 months left of that series to upload, so almost done, almost over. Then my other series right now, I'm doing Pirates of the Caribbean, the GBA game. This one's kind of a hard sell. It's stuff I find interesting. I do find like licensed games interesting from like back in the day, back in the 2000s, like something that tied into like a movie or something popular at the time, pop culture. And so that kind of stuff really interests me to like look at, and I feel like a lot of people don't dive too deep into these when they play them. So I kind of find it fun to like do a let's play. I've also done like some Naruto GBA games. GBA games especially, I feel like kind of get ignored. Portable games just because they're not perceived as like full-featured console experiences. They're kind of even lesser than that. But this one is especially interesting, I think. It's really weird. So check that out if you feel up to it. I'll probably do more things in that vein in the future. I don't know. I like early 2000s stuff. That's my wheelhouse. Early 2000s to like mid, I guess just the 2000s is what I like. Very nostalgic for that area. Anyways, that's the video. I've hoped, I don't know, that I redeemed myself. I don't know if I should. Honestly, I feel like what I should have done is just not uploaded that stupid video in the first place. I don't know if I should, be seeking redemption because that was just a dumb decision overall. But all right, well, goodbye.